Let's talk Suella Braverman. We all knew, didn't we, that she was going to come. Her husband had joined about a year ago. It was discussed all over Westminster, the back channel sort of saying this is why she's not come yet. Maybe she will, maybe she won't, but everyone kind of expected it. The Tories are sort of brushing this off as if nothing to see here. We wanted rid of her anyway. You're doing the spring cleaning for us. But a recent poll in Conservative homes shows that Suella Braverman is still the Conservative grassroots favourite backbencher. So this is a bit of a blow for them and probably a bit of a decent scalp for Mr Farage.
Well, Suella Braverman has been sort of flirting with joining Reform for a very long time, much in the same way as Robert Jenrick had. And, you know, we thought she might, I say we, and I'm really referring to when Richard Tice, my partner, was in charge of the party. You know, there was always a slight hope that she might join back then, and she spent a good long time thinking about it, and I'm not quite sure what held her back, but better late than never, I would say. I think she's going to be a huge asset to the party, and any attempt by the Tory party leadership to cast this as some kind of good news for them is so disingenuous as to be quite repellent, actually. Yeah. You know, and we've had a couple of examples of this today, and I don't really want to I'm sort of conscious I'm muddling up two really big topics here, but we've had on the one hand Keir Starmer trying to pretend that his reasons for blocking Andy Burnham were all about, you know, they don't want to trouble voters with unnecessary elections and other things like that. And then you've got the Tories pretending that it's somehow a good thing that Suella Braverman defects to Reform. Politicians, can they please just stop lying to voters? Because this is so bad for our politics in general. We know you're talking nonsense, so please don't do it. There is no point in spinning these yarns to intelligent people. You don't even have to be intelligent to see it's nonsense.
But then I think, you know, there would be one line of thought, people watching Reform and saying, hang on a minute, this basically just looks like Rishi Sunak's cabinet with Nigel instead of Rishi. Is it going to get to a point where there is one Tory too many, that Reform just isn't Reform anymore? It's just, well, the Conservatives.
Well, I don't want any actual Tories. I only want Tories who have become reformers. You know, the question is, are these people that are coming over ideologically aligned with Reform? And the answer is yes. You know, the type of MPs that are coming to Reform are MPs that thought many years ago that they had joined a Conservative party, a right of centre party, with all the ideologies and sort of principles and frameworks that go with being what we all understood a Conservative to be back in the day. And in fact, they would probably say the Conservative Party has left them, and they are just not Conservatives anymore under what Conservatives are today. You know, these are people that believe in a small state, that believe in controlling our borders, that believe in opportunity, not scrounging in a huge welfare state, and so on. And I don't want to give a long diatribe on that. We all know what we're talking about here. The Conservative Party is not worth the name Conservative. It has gone so far to the left that actually I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some defections from Kemi Badenoch's party to the Lib Dems.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because you've got, is it Andy Street and Ruth Davidson sort of wanting to resurrect the Conservative Party of old, the Cameroon years. Dominic Grieve cheering from the sidelines. He's just crawled out of his coffin, opened a bottle of something, mineral water, no doubt. He doesn't seem like the most exciting man. I'm like, yeah, good on you. That's going to take you right back to where you need to be. Shall we have a little look at some of the action, shall we? This is Suella defecting to Reform.
I believe that a better Britain is possible. And because I believe that is possible, today I'm announcing that I resign the Conservative whip. I resign the Conservative whip and my party membership, a party membership of 30 years. It's gone. It's over today. And because I believe with my heart and soul that a better future is possible for us, I am joining Reform UK.
I tell you what, if someone out there watched that and thought that she tried hard, didn't she, to get a reform coloured suit, if someone came out with a line of reform sort of hued office wear, they could probably do quite a good money spinner, I reckon. This is the reaction of the Labour Party.
People that are thinking about voting reform should think, do I want to have a party that represents me in Parliament that now has more Conservative MPs than Reform MPs that were elected in 2024? Nigel Farage is hell-bent on filling Reform's ranks with failed Tories. Of course, Suella was Liz Truss's Home Secretary. She was sacked, basically, after breaching the ministerial code. And we now have 26 former Conservative MPs that are now in the Reform Party.
I mean, the point that I was making, there will be some people out there who are saying, well, you know, is this sort of authentic and new, or have these faces been around for quite a while? Do you think another sort of thing that I've heard being knocked about is at what point are egos going to clash? We've seen fallouts within the hierarchy of reform before. Some of these people have big ambitions. Are they getting back into it because they expect cabinet positions? Would we be right to give them, would reform be right to give them cabinet positions? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I want to make a point about that boring intervention or boring commentary from the Labour guy. I mean, of course, everybody that is a member of Reform voted for other parties in the past because Reform didn't exist. Reform is trying to win over people that were formerly backers of other parties. So it goes without saying we're going to get people who used to be Conservatives. So let's park that one there. In terms of the ego, this is a really interesting thing to kind of observe, and I suppose from the side be a little bit tangentially part of, because I've been part of Reform essentially since it began, you know, around a kitchen table, and there were only really a few of us keeping it going. And now it's just this juggernaut. It gets bigger and bigger by the day. And it's really fascinating to see how that plays out and how that will play out. Because, of course, once you've got lots of big beasts, you know, what do big beasts do when they're all in the jungle together, or they're all in the in the wherever it is they hang out? They do tend to clash. And it becomes more difficult to maintain control the larger a party gets. And, you know, of course, as a political journalist, I've seen this with all the other parties. We're watching it in real time with the Conservatives, the clashing of big egos. We're watching it in real time with Labour, and it was ever thus in politics. And I'm afraid it's natural that will happen in Reform. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, out of these tussles, parties work out what it is they really want, what kind of direction they want, and who are the best people for what roles. It's not something I think any of us who've been on the journey from the start relish the thought of, but I think that the Deputy Leader, Richard Tice, would say it's a nice problem to have, you know. And I cast back to when, you know, it was really just a handful of people. Well, sure, you've got control over it, but you haven't got a winning force, and Reform does now have that.
I mean, do you think this is it now? Have we sort of defectioned out? Have we heard the last of people crossing the floor to Reform? Or are there a few more Conservatives? We heard even that there might be an ex-Labour MP looking to join the ranks of Reform.
Well, I mean, of course, this is always up to the party leader, and he keeps his cards so close to his chest. You know, nobody is told what is happening with these defections, and quite right too. It's a really, really smart way of handling things, because it means that stuff doesn't leak. And as we saw with poor Robert Jenrick a week or 10 days ago, goodness knows it feels a long time ago now, when defections leak, they can go very awry. And, you know, he found himself being fired because his own defection was leaked, not quite sure how, some suggestion of leaving a letter lying around on a photocopier. So Nigel handles those things in his way, which is to keep it extremely tight. So I don't know what more defections there will be. I am sure there will be plenty more. He's given that deadline. And what is the strategy here? It is foot on the neck or foot on the throat of the Conservative Party. Forget this whole unite the right thing. I mean, fine, we can unite the right under an actual right-wing party, which is Reform. But uniting the right should not be mistaken for being, let's just merge the Tory party and Reform. Nigel Farage is out to destroy the Conservative Party as a credible force, and I think he's doing a very, very effective job of it.
You're talking about there being a battle of egos within the Conservative Party. One imagines that's just at this point between Kemi Badenoch and her reflection in the mirror, given the way things are going. Isabel, stick with us, because now we've covered off today's big defection news. We'll go back to, well, sort of yesterday's and today's. It's the front pages of all the papers today. Big Labour news, which is Sir Keir Starmer saying to Andy Burnham, well, via the operations of the NEC, now, mate, you made your bed, you're going to have to sleep in it, and that means Greater Manchester Mayor, you will stay. We'll be discussing that just after this. Well, defections, and then defences when it comes to Starmer, making up excuses for blocking Andy Burnham, who, of course, we all knew, because it had been trailed so much in the press that the King of the North, as Beth Rigby likes to call him, amongst him and her, I seem to think. The King of the North had his intention to come back as an MP because, well, he just didn't like mayoring anymore. What's mayoring about? No, I would rather just sit on the back bench, twiddle my thumbs and respond to green biro letters from the constituents. Pull the other one, Andy. We all knew that you wanted to go and stand in Gorton in Manchester because you wanted a run at the top job. And I would have to say this, because there's been a lot of criticism of Sir Keir Starmer. Oh, he's weak. Oh, he's invited a whole world of pain on him. Oh, by blocking this, that's the end of his days. Like I said earlier, I'm beginning to have a shred of respect for the man, because if I was the Prime Minister and some upstart who had stood as mayor and got it and was supposed to be getting on with that job suddenly thought they were going to challenge me for the job, and in doing so, can I just say, whenever you create this political psychodrama, it does have an impact on the rest of us, because it tends to spook the markets if they think the Prime Minister is slipping away from a position of control. And also, it would create yet another by-election, but this time for the Mayor of Manchester, which comes with a price tag. And I kind of think to myself, Mr. Burnham, you're a bit venal, aren't you? Bit up your own backside, thinking you can just waltz in and try and take the top job. And I kind of think that Starmer saying, well, you know, elections cost a lot of money, and isn't he doing a great job as mayor, was, well, fair play. I mean, just put him back in his box has made me think that the man actually can control at least one thing in his life. Let's have a little look at, well, let's look at Sir Keir Starmer, shall we, talking about why Burnham is not going to be running in that by-election.
Andy Burnham's doing a great job as the Mayor of Manchester, but having an election for the Mayor of Manchester when it's not necessary would divert our resources away from the elections that we must have and that we must fight and win.
God, he really is stressed if that's the size of his medicine cabinet. Look at that. Let's bring back in Isabel Oakeshott. Hello, Isabel. I mean, look, this has been dragged out for a long time. The idea there's going to be a coup and Andy Burnham was going to be the man to usurp the throne from underneath Sir Keir. And I kind of think, what did everyone expect him to do? Just roll out the red carpet and let him in?
Well, if you were Starmer's press advisor, would you really think it was a great idea to do a photo op and a video in a pharmacy? Right. I mean, it just makes him look, it just sort of, it's a headline writer's dream, isn't it, about pill popping and, you know, what he needs to change his personality or make him better looking or whatever. Just so, what a dismal vision that was. I kind of like the way you put it there. You put a whole different spin on Starmer's decision to block Burnham, and you actually made him sound quite good. In fact, perhaps you should be his spin doctor. You certainly would be doing a better job. So fine, let's cast it that way. This is a sign of Starmer taking control, but that doesn't quite work because he didn't put it like that. He insulted our intelligence by pretending that he didn't want Burnham to stand because it would create an unnecessary election and that would be inconvenient for voters. That was a load of old twaddle, wasn't it? Elections don't inconvenience voters because they don't have to vote in elections. He should have just said, you know, hang on a minute here. We've all got important jobs to do. I see you, Andy Burnham. I know why you want to come back. You want to come back because you want a tilt at the top job. Well, there's no vacancy. So get back in your box. And by the way, while you're at it, you made a massive song and a dance about ending homelessness in Manchester. Spend 10 minutes in Manchester and you'll see what an absolute abject failure that has been. And I, Keir Starmer, can list another 10 things that you've screwed up in Manchester. So how about you fix your own backyard before you come sauntering down and trying to park your tanks on my lawn? Now, if he'd said that, then that would have been a little bit more honest, I think, and I think we might all have respected him for it.
I mean, to be honest, Sir Keir Starmer's only got one criticism up his sleeve, which is the button that sounds the far-right signal. So he should probably turn around and say Andy Burnham had become a fascist or something. There's been this whole sort of, particularly from, let's call them the legacy media, this sort of fawning over the concept of Andy Burnham. And it's a bit like when Angela Rayner with her gazillion houses got booted out, and nobody seemed to point out who on earth does she think she is when she's elected in the north of the country to be given up her house there to move about 300 miles away to have a house on the beach. You've got a job to do. That's your constituency. That's where you're from. That's where you decided to go and stand. Give it a moment, would you? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any criticism of the venality of these politicians who just think they can move pieces around the board and play at politics. It doesn't matter if I got voted in and where I got voted in and where I live and, how many clothes I'm getting off that Lord Alley man. No. I want what I want. And I must admit, I just think the sheen has somewhat come off Andy Burnham if he had anything other than the sort of damp on his forehead anyway.
I think that Starmer's move today unfortunately strengthened Andy Burnham. He's a sort of king across the water, isn't he? And, I say that with reservations. I know Andy Burnham, I'd say fairly well. I followed his career. I first got to know him when he was just a PPS, the most junior rung on the ministerial ladder in the days of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. And he is a really nice guy and he's a solid minister. But I've never, ever thought that he was A-list. Now, as you and I both know in politics, weirdly, often there are non-A-list people that somehow make it up to the very top. And,
well, that's most of the cabinet for you.
Well, all credit to him. He has come very far. But I don't think he's the guy to lift Britain out of its absolute mire. I don't think he's got the policy agenda, the ideological agenda to resolve the fundamental issues facing our country. I mean, have you ever heard him talking about, for example, immigration in any kind of way that would resonate with millions of voters for whom that is the number one issue? Have you ever heard him talk about ditching or modifying net zero? I certainly haven't. And I could go on listing the key things that people are fed up about. I don't think Andy Burnham has ever said anything interesting on any of them.
Oh, do you think that's what Sir Keir Starmer's doing in the pharmacy, looking for the right medicine for the country? Because having a Labour government at this time of crisis feels a bit like trying to cure cancer with even more cancer. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure he probably is a nice man, but I don't know. I just think it was a little bit unbecoming. If you want to have a run at the leadership of the party, then you're going to have to wait until the next general election.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I couldn't sit here and say that when there are people that are crossing the floor to other parties. Politics is about pragmatism. And if you truly believe that the country is going down the plug hole, as I'm sure Andy Burnham does, then you don't sit on the sidelines. If you think that you are the person that can save it, then you do whatever you can to try and get yourself in that position. Now, you and I suspect the sum total of zero of our listeners think that Andy Burnham is the person to save the country. But I can't blame him for giving it a go if he truly believes that he's got what it takes. And could he really be worse than Keir Starmer? I mean, in brackets, maybe.
What do you think is going to go on in that by-election now? Because at one stage it looked like it could be quite an interesting contest, because when I looked at the numbers, although they weren't present polling, but sort of estimations accumulated or conglomerated from various previous polls, it looked like it could potentially be a three-horse race between the Labour Party, Reform and even the Green Party. And I noticed Zach Polanski didn't run in his weird sort of club-footed way at the opportunity, probably assuming that he wouldn't win it if Andy Burnham was going to be the Labour candidate simply because of name recognition. But now he's out of the picture. Reform must be smacking their lips with potential anticipation that they could snatch it.
Well, I think Reform always thought that they had a pretty good chance at it, and that, in a way, well, you've got to give Andy Burnham some credit for thinking that he would absolutely be able to win that by-election. I'm not sure it was remotely sort of in the bag for him had he been able to run there. I think that a good Reform candidate, I'm not sure who that candidate is going to be, has got a really decent chance up there, especially with Zach Polanski saying he's not going to run. And that was the other thing, the truth is the state of Manchester, my goodness, the state of Manchester. Now, I know it's had a load of regeneration money. I actually love Manchester. It's a great, great city. But my goodness, it's got problems. And many of them are absolutely symbolic of the wider problems around the country. I mean, crime, immigration issues, all the other stuff. It's all on display there if you spend any time in the city centre.
Do you know what? I actually used to live in Manchester, and I used to live in that constituency, believe it or not. Burnage and Levenshulme being parts of it. And Burnage is where the good old Gallagher brothers used to go out on the rob, apparently. Used to go nicking stuff around the place. That was their neighbourhood. But it's interesting because Manchester, very left-wing...
Alex, I think we'd better be careful about
well, according to what they may or may not have said themselves, I'm sure that they were very upstanding young gentlemen citizens.
Just to be clear.
But interesting, it is a reflection on Manchester, because you get into the central heart of Manchester, very young, very left-wing, very, let's put in inverted commas, progressive, although I tend to find a lot of that left-wing the complete opposite. But in those particular constituencies out there is when you do tend to get the sort of more... what's typical Reform voting, Brexit voting type of character. It is a sort of it's a city of two halves, and it'd be if Reform did get in there, it's rather putting the fox in the hen house.
Well, do you know what? I was just thinking today about Nigel Farage's fox in the hen house comment when the first group of Reform MPs got into Parliament, and there were 5 of them, weren't there? First we thought it was 4, and then it became 5. As James McMurdoch won that seat by just a handful of votes. And everyone at the time was sort of sniffing and saying, oh, well, what can they possibly do? There's only 5 of them. And Nigel Farage said, the fox is in the hen house. And my goodness, hasn't he been proven to be right? And it is a stunning example of what a small group of people who are disproportionately smart and committed and creative and noisy, what they can actually do from such a small foothold in our political system, which everybody assumed would be impossible really to break that two-party kind of grip on things.
We do live in very interesting times politically. We're going to turn our attention after the break to, the fact that ISIS brides are now being shipped back to the UK. It's only a matter of time, people say, until Shamima Begum thinks it's her opportunity to come home. We're going to be discussing that after this. All right, hello and welcome back to the show. Let us now focus our attention on what is a pretty alarming story. It originally popped up in The Telegraph, where a source from the Al-Hoj camp in Syria, the east of Syria, which has for quite a while been under the control of the SDF, the Syrian Defence Force, which is largely made up of Kurdish people. And now there's a new newish Syrian government, Giovanni. There's a bit of a reprisal going on and lots of fights breaking out in that part of the world. But the Kurds are still in control of vast refugee camps, largely housing women and children. In one camp in particular, there's 6,200 women and children from 40 different nationalities. Well, as tensions flare, there seems to have been, opportunists and perhaps inside jobs using the chaos in order to try and break out. And this has now involved at least 6 women and 9 children being sent back to Britain from camps that were held by the Syrian Democratic Forces. I don't know what has happened to them since they've returned. I don't know the character of these people. Various campaigners say, well, they were just children when they went over, and that decisions are being taken on a case-by-case basis. And meanwhile, the British government has come under criticism for not opening its doors to the lot of them. The British position is still to stand firm and say to the likes of perhaps Shamima Begum, I'm afraid you will not be welcomed home. Let's bring back in Isabel Oakeshott. It's alarming. It's alarming because whatever happens, what we do know is there are tens of thousands of former ISIS fighters, be they men, women or indeed children, who could soon be let loose in Syria and from there in the chaos cross borders and end up who knows where, given the fighting going on in the east of the country. And when I've read reports from some of these camps, I've read one particular story that there have been tens of thousands of babies born to what would be the next generation of fighters for the caliphate, because when boys in this camp allegedly hit puberty, they're encouraged to go and father children to try and grow the numbers. And people who have a far better idea of these camps than I do say, well, there might be a few people who are very remorseful about foolish decisions they made, swept up, groomed online perhaps in the course of that decision to go and join the supposed caliphate in Syria. But there are plenty others who are extremists, who haven't changed one iota in terms of their Islamism, their terrorist inclinations. In fact, one might say that these camps have rather become a petri dish for breeding even stronger flavoured extremism. So what does Britain do about this, Isabel?
It is, well, I was about to say it's a really tricky question, but in a way it isn't. You know, put really simply, we don't want any jihadis or any Mrs. Jihadis in our country. What about mini baby jihadis? Well, I mean, if they've got non-jihadi grannies and grandpas in the UK, maybe they can be repatriated without mummy jihadi. But I just think that what is the good for Britain of having these people back? Now, the sort of legal issue is that we're not supposed to make people stateless. And if they don't have other passports, then that does raise the whole question that Shamima Begum has raised. But on balance, I would say that the default position has to be you went out to Syria to do this stuff. You are clearly associated with this stuff. Therefore, you stay. You made your bed, you lie in it. You want to be out there, you stay out there. You want a caliphate? Well, you know, hoping Syria is never going to be one of those. But you're sure as hell likely to have it, more likely to have it there than you are in the UK.
I understand that America is potentially going to withdraw its forces from Syria, the ones that's remained, and have struck up a deal with Iraq to take some of their male prisoners, but have sort of gone off AWOL, rather, when it comes to the Kurds running the camps, trying to communicate with America, saying, right, you know, what is being done? It seems they haven't picked up the phone to them in a while. I think what is brewing in Syria looks extremely troubling, and it's interesting, it's beginning to have an impact on our streets as well. Going back to Manchester, I don't know if you saw the videos online from this week of big fights taking place between the Kurdish and Syrian communities, let's call them, in places like Manchester. It's also been happening in Antwerp, involving mass stabbings.
Well, and funny enough, somebody shared a video, a really disturbing video with me today from some organisation called something like the Islamic Caliphate of Britain or something.
Oh,
and I'm
gosh.
thinking, what the heck? You know, we've got to be so much more careful about what we're doing here. You know, when people are bringing their political and geopolitical disputes from other parts of the world onto our streets, we really have lost control of who we are and how we manage ourselves. And I know at the very lowest level, this is actually played out in our migrant hotels, in those hotels full of asylum seekers. Fights frequently break out. I'm not just inventing this. I'm getting it from a source that we interviewed here on Talk, Adam, who worked in a migrant hotel, and talked of different nationalities fighting between them, playing out the conflicts that are happening in parts of Africa or parts of the Middle East in our own country. I mean, seriously, if you do that, you should be deported right back. If you're going to fight about your country of origin, well, how about you fight in your country of origin? How about that for a novel idea?
I mean, also, the most obvious thing ever stated by anyone ever, security advisor to the government, Jonathan Powell, saying, well, what, do you know what? I think some terrorists might have come over on those boats, you know? You don't say. It staggers me to this day that when we've had briefings from the counter-extremism czar, we've had no doubt warnings from the intelligence agencies, now Jonathan Powell, that the government could pull an emergency lever and say, this is a national security crisis. We just simply will not be taking anybody anymore who breaks into the country legally, and those that do will have to be kept in detention centres.
Well, absolutely. And we did a story on Talk last week on Kev's show about the detention centre, the newly refurbed detention centre just outside Oxford, which they've spent £70 million upgrading for the grand total of 160 spaces. That's less for foreign nationals who are foreign criminals or earmarked for deportation. That is less than 2 boatloads of migrants. You know, £70 million to accommodate 2 boatloads. That's sort of a fraction of what comes over in the busy weeks in the summer. And yet that detention centre isn't even full. And you're just left wondering, what are these guys playing at, those that lead us, you know, with their squanderous abuse of taxpayers' money, spending tens of millions on this stuff and then not even using it. It is so sickening, isn't it?
It's a lackadaisical approach to our basic security that troubles me the deepest. In fact, we are going to be talking to Kim Bailey, who's the chairwoman of Crowborough Shield, the protest taking place in Crowborough in Sussex because migrants have started to be, under the quiet and dark of the night, shipped into the army barracks there. We're going to be catching up with her in the next hour. I mean, look, this story is not going to go away. We heard, didn't we, of quite late after the effect, the 27,000 odd Afghans who were secretly brought to the UK, and the way that system had been infiltrated and gamed by the Taliban, for instance. And I have no doubt that as things get more and more unsettled in Syria, we're doubtless going to see people fleeing those camps, and they might not make it straight to Britain at the invitation of His Majesty's government, but I have no doubt that they will somehow get across various countries. All they have to do is get into Turkey, really, and then it's straight on from there.
Well, exactly that. And, you know, in due course, it will not be long at all before the weather starts getting better in northern France. The seas start getting a bit calmer, a little bit less absolutely perishing cold, and those crossings are going to tick up again. The only reason that there are less boats coming across is simply because people would perish. The water is so freezing. Now, voters may picture passengers on these migrant dinghies boarding from some kind of jetty. No, they don't. They have to wade into the water. They're well out of their depth. And the issue now is not necessarily just that the seas are too rough, but it is just so damn cold that a lot of those would not make it into the boat without collapsing with hypothermia. And whilst the people smugglers really don't care in the slightest about the welfare of their human cargo, they do realise that repeatedly killing their customers is probably not great for the business model.
Isabel, thank you ever so much. Join us again after this break, where we are going to be discussing whether the BBC are able to reform or whether the licence fee is on its way out, following comments made by the outgoing Director General, Tim Davie. That discussion is coming up after this. All right there, my lovely things. Thank you for your messages. I'm going to read some of those in just a moment, and just a little friendly reminder that you can also give me a call if you'd like. That'd be nice. 03444 99 1000 is the number to dial. The brilliant Matt is waiting to hear from you and register your details, and then we'll give you a ping back when it is time for you to join me on air. So don't be shy. It don't cost you nothing. It's your normal network rate. It costs the same as, I don't know, phoning your nan and she hasn't heard from you in ages. Right, let's go back to business and speak with the wonderful Isabel Oakeshott again. Tim Davie, the outgoing Director General of the BBC, has warned that the corporation will be in profound jeopardy unless the current licence fee system is overhauled. The majority of the BBC's funding comes from the licence fee, which, as we all know, is now a whopping £174.50 per year per household, which, by and large, these days is more than your Netflix. It's not just about the licence fee, though, is it, Isabel? I'm pretty sure if the BBC were actually making content that people really want and didn't seem to be the sort of, you know, fifth column of the Labour Party, people might not mind paying that much anymore. But it seems to me, other than Traitors, which has gone down a storm, they still haven't really got the message that if they're going to charge the fee that they charge, they're going to have to reflect the nation a bit more.
I think people have got so used to being able to get amazing content very often for nothing at all. You know, a lot of young people are just consuming their media through TikTok, through YouTube. They're not paying for it. They're not necessarily feeling the need to pay for any kind of premium service. And they're definitely not sitting down at specific times of the day to turn on the TV and try to find the correct channel and watch a programme that they can only watch one episode of. And in some ways, it's good to hear that Tim Davie's acknowledging that things are going to have to change and that the licence fee cannot be taken for granted. And it was a shame that the Conservatives, who made sort of noises and teased about the possibility of reforming that system, never actually did it. But Nigel Farage has been quite clear about it, hasn't he? He said that the BBC, if Reform were to win the next election, will not be able to continue with business as usual. It is so bloated, it is so biased, and it simply can no longer justify its existence on the current terms.
So what would that look like? Perhaps a subscription service, advertisements, or actually just shaving down the licence fee to something, a fraction of what it currently is, and stipulating quite what you want from that money?
Well, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the future model of the BBC licence fee because I simply don't care enough about the issue. I don't watch much BBC myself. I look at their website quite a lot because it's always instructive to see what they think are the most important stories. I thought their coverage of the attempted Iranian revolution was absolutely pitiful and a dereliction.
Yeah, I was going to say coverage doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Absolutely, and their coverage of the horrendous aftermath of that seemingly failed revolution, tragically, has also left a lot to be wanting. So I don't think I'm going to sit here and start saying what a future licensing model would look like, but I think it would look like not forcing the British people, not forcing them, because that is pretty much what happens, to pay for something they don't want to watch.
Well, actually, to pay for things that they do want to watch, which aren't even on the same channel as anything to do with the BBC, which I think is the most egregious part of the whole licence structure. But can they change? I mean, you know, I've worked at the BBC and it moves at a glacial pace. It is a behemoth. It's filled with the chattering classes and Guardianistas. When you look at that huge sort of fallout with Trump over the editing of the Newsnight clip, I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if he's still planning to sue the BBC. That one's kind of slipped through the net for me anyway. But you do realise that these aren't just little accidental mistakes. You know, things don't magically edit themselves together in the ether that 1 minute you're sitting there ingesting, as they say in the biz, the speech from America, and it's an hour long, and somehow two different bits of the speech magically through do the ethers of the BBC editing suite cling to each other and then have mood music put underneath and grey filters in order to make it look as if the president is inciting an insurrection. That wasn't a mistake. I think the way that the BBC handled that was appalling. They should have turned around. Heads should have rolled, frankly. Heads should have rolled, because whether you like Trump or loathe Trump or whether you don't care, that, if you are the public service broadcaster and this is news, is not delivering news. That is inventing news. That is essentially doing the worst thing that a journalist can do and fudging it to create a completely different story.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, I sort of have a bit of sport just looking at BBC headlines and seeing whether they are misleading the viewer or the reader. There's an interesting one tonight about some, quote, far-right people from British nationals, far-right, who have been arrested in northern France because they were planning to attend some kind of migrant protest. I don't know. Maybe they are far right. Quite possibly they are far right, but it just got my suspicions up. What exactly went on there? The BBC hasn't reported that story properly. They've just delighted in using the term far right. As I say, I think it's very possible that they genuinely are far right people, but nothing much more is explained in that piece. I feel that the BBC is all too quick to delight and savour using terminology like that when it comes to our politics.
And thus has it been for a long time. I was at the BBC in 2009. 2009, that's
Yeah,
right. That's when I was working there. And it was a
get a
left-wing
job
horror
now.
story back then, Isabel.
I don't think you'd get a job back there now, do you? I mean, I think if you were I to apply for a job at the BBC, it would be one giant straight away, because we just don't have the right politics.
No, not the right politics, not the right name, not the right colourings, can I just say. Even back then it was a case of, what, Alexandra Phillips, that sounds a bit Middle Britain. You're not going to ever be on screen. But there you go. The BBC is probably a hostage of its own fortune or something to that effect. Isabel, thank you ever so much. It's always wonderful catching up with you. What a delight to be able to spend an hour in your company.